You're muted. You're muted. We can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Okay, sorry. Good evening, everybody. We're so happy that you were able to join us tonight. And we're so fortunate to have two incredible speakers with us. My big sister, Mrs. Rivkah Slonim, who is famous for being the author of two incredible books, The Total Immersion and Bread and Fire. She's also a shlucha of the Rebbe to University of Binghamton, where she hosts over 400 students every single Shabbat for the past, I would say, 35 years. Perhaps we're on the 36th year already. So a veteran shlucha on campus, a lecturer, world-renowned lecturer all over the world. I can say a mentor to me, a mentor to so many, extremely knowledgeable in this incredible mitzvah of Mikvah, and she took out of her very busy schedule to talk to our community, a community that was under fire, a community that has shown that no matter what the circumstances are, no matter how difficult it is, we will find a way to go to the mikvah. And it's been quite challenging the last few weeks. And despite all of the challenges and despite the holidays in between, where there was no mikvah open in Kotzin Loop, women found ways to walk the extra mile and to seek and find a way to do this special mitzvah. We also have with us an incredible woman, a doctor, Dr. Esther Libman from Toronto, who has also taken out of her very busy schedule, was not looking for extra work, was not looking to put extra things on her agenda. We all know that it's the time where doctors are extremely busy, but as a from woman first, and as a doctor and a mother of 4 wonderful children, and as a woman that understands the importance of this mitzvah, she wholeheartedly agreed to join us tonight to help us understand how, despite COVID-19, the mikvah is actually safe for all of us to go into, and she's going to tell us how, and she has a few tips and things that she had helped incorporate, help the community of Toronto incorporate in their mikvaot. So without further ado, we will start with Mrs. Rivkah Slonim, who will give us an understanding of the importance of mikvah. Most of us here tonight do not have to be convinced. We are convinced, but perhaps we need that extra understanding, because now we're being challenged and we have to answer to so many, sometimes to our neighbors, to our friends, to our surroundings. And it's always good to know, it's important to be educated about a mitzvah that belongs to us women. So Mrs. Rivkah Slonim, please take it away.
Good evening, my dear sister. Thank you for your kind introduction. Good evening, Dr. Libman. It's an honor and privilege to share this, I guess, forum with you. I guess that's what we'll call it, the Zoominar. And good evening, friends. This is a surreal time for all of us at best, and has been downright harrowing for those who have suffered the virus and perhaps suffered losses. So first, I extend my condolences to anybody who has suffered a loss, and I offer my prayers that anybody who is not feeling well should experience a complete and speedy recovery. What I understand from the Rabbanit Sarah is that I will begin with a few words, and then that will segue into Dr. Libman's remarks, after which I will conclude with a few more remarks, and then we will open up for the most important part of this evening, and that is your questions and your comments. Please don't hold back. We very much want this to be a dialogue. I want to take you back with me to about 100 years ago, to a city in the Ukraine called Chernovitz. And in Chernovitz, there lived an interesting character. He was a chassid. He was also a decorated soldier in the Soviet army. His name was Reb Hershel Rabinovich. One night in Chernovitz, the rabbi called a meeting. He called for everybody, no exceptions, everybody to come to the shul, to come to the synagogue. And when everybody was gathered, the rabbi explained that there was a malfunction in the whatever primitive mechanism it was in the women's mikvah in the town, and the water was absolutely freezing, and that had to be repaired, and he expected everybody to contribute towards the repair. And one after the other, people said they didn't have money, their assets weren't liquid, their investments had gone south. Everybody had a great excuse for why they couldn't give to this cause. And the rabbi just stood there, and the plate that he passed around just remained empty, and nobody was doing anything, and nobody was giving anything. And Reb Hershel Rabinovich took in this scene. And after a number of minutes had passed with absolutely no movement, he walked to the front of the shul. Nobody asked him to do this. He walked to the front of the Aron HaKodesh, the Holy Ark. He opened up the Holy Ark, and he pointed to the Torah scroll, and he said, "My dear townsfolk, my fellow townsfolk, I just want to tell you that if we cannot raise the necessary money to fix the mechanism in order for there to be warm water for the women to be able to go to the mikvah, then I am going to take this Torah from the scroll and I'm going to burn it to warm up the water in the mikvah." And he continued and he said, "I want you to see my hands. With these hands, I'm going to do this. And don't think I'm just going to take the mantle of the Torah, and don't think I'm just going to take the wooden dowels, Atzei HaChaim. I'm going to take the entire Torah. I'm going to throw it into an oven. I'm going to generate heat to warm up the waters of the mikvah." And the people were absolutely shocked, but they could see in his eyes that he meant business. And it was like a magic show. All of a sudden, it was like the coins came out of the elbow, the coins came out of the ear, the coins came out of the pocket, and they were able to raise all the money they needed to fix the mechanism of the mikvah for the town of Chernovitz. Now you're listening to the story and you're thinking, yeah, Hasidim, they're crazy, they're wild-eyed zealots, these black-hatted fanatics, but they're crazy. Okay. So please come with me back in history a little bit further. If we were sitting in one room, I would ask you to raise your hands. But the way it's set up, and I'm spotlighted right now, so I can't see too many of your faces, even though we're playing Hollywood Squares here. And so I can't ask you to shake your hand, to raise your hands. But I'm pretty sure that if I asked you to raise your hands, most of you would say that you had visited Israel and that you were atop Masada. And on the top of Masada, if you go for, a tour, you'll find that there are the ruins of one of the most ancient mikvaot. And people marvel often at the intact ancient ruins that are so similar to the mikvah pools constructed today. But I want to share with you that I think that all of this wonder and marvel overlooks a startling fact. And that is, who built the mikveh atop Masada? Let's take a look at this. Who built it? It was built in the 1st century. It was the last decade before the destruction of the Second Temple. It was a time that was marked by internal strife, very painful and stern internal strife among the Jews, especially in Jerusalem and Yerushalayim. Without going into a crazy amount of detail, there were generally 3 camps. There were the Friends of Rome, which were largely comprised of the Sadducees or the Tzedokim. The second group were the silent, embittered majority. They favored an accord with Rome only because they believed that Rome could not be defeated. And then there was the third group, the Zealots. They were determined to drive Rome out of Israel and establish an independent Israeli state, a Jewish state. But here's when things got interesting. Hordes of lawless bandits called the Sikari joined the Zealots. They joined up with the Zealots, and they terrorized anyone who opposed them, including their fellow Jews. Yes, it was this Sikari, not terribly pious, certainly not mainstream or establishment Jews, who in the year 66 overcame a Roman garrison and settled in the fortress we today call Masada. And in that tenuous, precarious time, not knowing how long they would survive, these marginally affiliated, scantily observant Jews built and maintained the mikveh. It's a startling fact. These Jews would have been considered marginally or peripherally observant. As some of you probably know, they were really at odds with the rabbis, with the rabbanim. Yet they knew that you could not have life without a mikveh, that Jewish life could not be sustained for even 1 hour, for 1 day, for 1 week, for 1 month. They did not know how long they were going to live. But whatever it was, they could not be without a mikveh. Now, practically, they could not leave that holdout. Clearly, they were not maintaining the mikveh to retain spiritual purity to visit the temple that would fall decisively just a few years later. So they built and maintained the mikveh for only one purpose, taharat hamishpacha, family purity. Now think about that. I want you to think about that for a moment. And then I want you to add another overlay. And here historians are divided on if the Jew atop Masada suffered a dearth of water or not. According to some, they did. It was very hard for them to bring water up into that fortress. And if they suffered a dearth of water, the fact that they allocated the water necessary to fill and maintain the mikveh for family purity speaks volumes to the centrality of this mitzvah in Jewish life. Tonight, you, the women, men of Kot St. Luke, have gathered to strengthen your resolve and learn more about this most important mitzvah, a mitzvah that almost obfuscates all other mitzvot in the Torah. If you were to say to someone, what are the 3 most important mitzvot in the entire Torah? If Judaism is a table, what are the 3 legs? The only answer is Shabbat, Kashrut, kosher diet, and mikvah, and family purity. But if you pressed further and you said, which has the deepest, widest, most profound impact, it would have to be this mitzvah. Because when the woman goes into the mikvah, she brings not only herself, but the souls of her husband, her children. That's why it's called Taharat HaMishpacha, the whole family. It's really Taharat Am Yisrael, the purity of the nation. And this virus has been an interesting time to kind of see this in a new light, because we went into a period of time where it might have even been that there was not even one synagogue open in the entire world. But yet, in most locations, sadly not in your own, but in most locations, the mikvaot remained open, the women's mikvaot. And this illuminated a fact that many people simply don't pay enough attention to. Judaism is no more a synagogue-based religion than it is a church-based religion, a mosque-based religion, an ashram-based religion. We're not a synagogue-based religion. It was very hard to have the synagogues closed. It was very sad. It was difficult. We're creatures of habit. But in terms of our Judaism, the home is where it happens. And the only essential institution in all of Jewish infrastructure is the mikvah. Because without the mikvah, we cannot continue in our intimate lives. Without the mikvah, there cannot be progeny. So when I say that the mikvah is literally the door, the portal into the Jewish future, it's not poetry. It's not hyperbole. It's simply the fact. Without a mikvah, we can do nothing. Now, we Jews are very, very sensitive to the idea of pikuach nefesh, of what might be dangerous to life. Almost everything in our tradition yields to this value, to this overarching value. But on the other hand, there are certain things that don't yield, and those are idol worship, murder, and immoral acts, immoral sexual acts, because there has to be a definition to the life that you are looking to protect. We value life above all else, but we also have a definition of life. Marital life, intimate life is not possible for a Jew without a mikvah. This has always been the case. And this is why, according to Jewish law, if you have money to build a synagogue or a mikvah, there's no contest. The money has to go towards building a mikvah. If you have to sell a Torah scroll, you sell the Torah scroll. Baruch Hashem, thank God. We hope and pray that the worst of the virus is behind us. And I understand that a Mazel Tov is in order because the mikvah in your area is set to reopen shortly. And now really is the time to rededicate ourselves to this mitzvah, to truly understand as much as we can about it. And I will come back to speak more about the concept and then take your questions after Dr. Libman explains what you need to know about the use of mikvah today. And in this, we want to say post, but almost nearly post-COVID-19 era, please God, we will not see a rebound. We will not see a second wave. If God forbid we do, Dr. Libman will prepare us. Dr. Libman, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for those wonderful words, Rebbitzin Slonim, and thank you very much, Sarah, for inviting me here today. I actually grew up in Côte St. Luc. I feel like I'm coming home. But of course, I suppose by Zoom, I'm actually not traveling anywhere, but I do feel connected to your community in a very big way. These are obviously very bizarre times, and Zoom has now become a new way of disseminating information. I mean, there are advantages of Zoom. You only have to get dressed from the shoulder up. You could wear pajamas underneath that, and you only have to brush the front part of your shadel, so that's another advantage. But I can't feel the people in the room, so that is a major disadvantage. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about the real low risk that the mikveh has. I think people are very worried about it, and I just wanted to talk with the facts that we know them, and I'm hoping to be able to reassure you. Okay, first of all, how to catch COVID without really trying. COVID is a droplet spread, mostly a droplet spread disease, and that means if you are within 6 feet or 2 meters of another person's face, then they're breathing out their germs could go into your lungs, and that's how you would catch it. The other way that you would catch it could be a little bit of an aerosol in the air of the person breathing, which is even if you are beyond 6 feet, there might be some air droplets persisting. There might be some of that, and also surfaces. Surfaces is the least way you can catch COVID because it really has to be pretty quick. Like you actually have to touch a cell phone. You have to touch your nose first, touch a cell phone, hand the cell phone to somebody else. They have to look at it, get contaminated, and then touch their own face. So it really has to be pretty quick, even though there is some data that there is a little bit of the virus still remaining on surfaces after several days. We really don't find people are catching COVID from peanut butter jars that they're picking up at the supermarket. Okay, so how are we making the mikveh safe? Now, there have been protocols for the mikveh that have been disseminated from the Jewish Orthodox Women's Medical Association from the States. And these protocols have been disseminated through to New York and Baltimore, Toronto, Montreal, Jerusalem. It is really spread, and we're all adopting very similar protocols. So what are they? First of all, the woman has to be screened. There's no drop-in and there's no waiting room because you are trying to avoid other people's faces. So you are going to be screened. You're going to be asked a bunch of questions, whether you've had any, whether you yourself are feeling unwell, and there's, a list of cough and fever and nausea and pink eye and so on. There's a list. And then we also want to make sure no one in the family has that also, because if one of the members of your family is sick, then they, of course, could be transmitting it to you without you knowing it, because people are contagious about 2 days before they exhibit symptoms. And more frustratingly, some people don't develop any symptoms and they can be asymptomatic spreaders. So we want to see if you're well, and we want to make sure everybody in the house is well. So those are important screening questions. When you arrive, of course, you're going to have an appointment just for you. So there will not be, again, anyone in the waiting room. The mikveh attendant will likely not be taking your money. I'm not sure what the protocol is actually in Côte Saint-Luc, but normally people are paying online, or those who are paying cash, let's say they're putting it in a box and the money is not touched for about a week, which is excessive, but that keeps it actually very safe. Now, the mikveh attendant should have a mask, and she should stay well apart from you, more than 6 feet, I think is even preferable. All the preparation to toivel all must be done at home. There's going to be no shared nail clippers or brushes or combs. Basically, you want to minimize the time that you are in the mikveh, because you don't want to be breathing in too much air, just in case somebody previously didn't know it, had a bit of COVID. You don't want to breathe in too much air. You need about 1,000 particles of virus to get sick. And if you breathe in less than that, you're not going to get sick. So we tell people to arrive fully prepared. You go into the mikveh. The mikveh water conveniently, easily kills the COVID germ. The chlorine will kill it. So in fact, being in the mikveh itself is the safest part of the whole procedure. And then when you come up, if you have to touch the railing, that railing needs to be cleaned before the next patron uses the mikveh. And then when you get out, you dry yourself quickly and leave with your wet hair and go. And if you do all that, then the mikveh is really a low risk activity. And when people say, well, how much risk? People have risk in life. There's a risk if you cross the street. There's a risk if you're in the car. You want to make sure that you only are taking reasonable and low risk in your life. And this is really regarded as a low risk activity. Now, I'm very happy to take any questions after, and that's all I have to say. And I'm hoping that this Megeva will be over soon, and we will all get through it together. Okay, be well. Rebbitzin Slonim.
Thank you so much, Dr. Libman. Thank you so much for your succinct presentation and instructions. Rebbitzin Raskin, do we want to take questions now on what Dr. Libman said, or for me to just give a few remarks and then take questions afterwards on both? Okay, I'm trying to read her lips. I think she's saying afterwards. Afterwards? Thumbs up if afterwards, yes? Okay, all right. Dr. Libman, does that work with your schedule? Are you okay to stay
Sure.
on for longer?
Sure.
Okay, all right, thank you. Well, thank you, because I've heard many people speak about the protocols regarding immersing in the mikvah now. And I think Dr. Libman did just a spectacular job of streamlining it, very, very clear, very, very practical. And I thank you for that.
Can I add one more thing, which I forgot to add? Some people think you have to go home and you have to shower immediately, and you do not have to do that. There's a very special infectious disease specialist and a rabbi, Dr. Aaron Glatt in New York, and he feels that you don't have to go home and shower. You should wash your hands after leaving the mikveh, just in case your hands have touched anything that could have possibly have had COVID. Even if your hands are dripping with COVID, even if you have a cut on your hands, you're not going to transmit that COVID germs to you unless you take your hands and touch your face. So we say, don't touch your face, wash your hands, then you won't catch it and you don't have to take a shower. And now to you, Rebitz and Slonim.
Perhaps one of the most efficacious aspects of wearing a mask is that it makes it harder to touch your mouth and your nose.
Right, yes, agreed.
Quite apart from any other things it might help us with. All right, so I wanted, with the time we have left, to just speak a little bit more about this special mitzvah about mikvah. And I see that on the chat group, we're being told that if you have questions and you want to have them addressed, then send them by text to Mrs. Ruskin. Alternatively, perhaps if you want to put them in the chat box, we can do it that way. So I want to go back to basics and just talk about when is a mikveh used in this current time, what most people call this post-temple era, but what we in Chabad prefer to call this pre-temple era. Please God, the temple will be rebuilt very, very soon, and then there will be a completely different usage of mikvah and abounding usages of mikvah. But in this current time, in Jewish law, there are 3 times that a mikvah has to be used. One is for the immersion of plates and pots, anything that will be used to cook or to serve food upon, made of certain materials, has to be immersed in a mikvah. And of course, like Sarah said, most of you are aware, of course, that a woman has to use the mikvah on a monthly basis. If she is menstruating, for as long as she is menstruating, she uses the mikvah. She immerses a week after she has ascertained that her period is over. And finally, immersion in the mikvah is the crescendo of the process of conversion into the Jewish faith for both men and women. And what the three have in common is that it's clear that immersing something in the mikvah changes its status. More precisely, it elevates its status. And it's very, very important to disabuse ourselves of the idea, the erroneous idea, that mikvah has something to do with physical hygiene. It's equally important to disabuse ourselves of the idea that a bathtub or a shower or a hot tub or a jacuzzi can serve as a mikvah. That is not the case. A mikvah, a kosher mikvah, is a difficult thing to build. It has to be built according to exacting specifications, and only mikvah, a domesticated mikvah built to those specifications, or a natural mikvah, 70% of our planet is actually covered with the original mikvah waters. But for various reasons, we've been building domesticated mikvah from the beginning of time. Lack of access, inclement weather, lack of privacy, safety, all of the reasons for why most women will immerse in what I'll call a domesticated mikvah. And like I said earlier, it's easily the most important mitzvah in the Torah. So the question is, why does it remain so mysterious to so many? So many people are aware of the kosher diet. So many people are aware of Shabbat. We're not saying they observe, they don't observe, but they've heard of it. But so many people tragically have not heard of this mitzvah of mikvah. And here I have to say that this is much more true for the Ashkenazic demographic than it is for the Sephardic. Sephardic women always celebrated mikvah. They remained extremely dedicated to mikvah. And perhaps it has to do with the fact that in the Sephardic culture, it didn't suffer the same kind of suffocation under a blanket of silence that it continues to suffer in the Ashkenazic world. And don't misunderstand me. I understand modesty, and I know that modesty is a very, very important value in our tradition. But this mitzvah has been ill-served by modesty. So I'm not saying that you have to call everybody and tell them you're going to the mikveh that night, but I feel that if people were to talk more casually about mikveh and make it part of normal discourse, it would normalize it, and more Jewish women would hear about it. Now, how did it fall into such a state where mikveh became the Cinderella of Jewish observance? It probably is a combination of a few factors. At least in the Ashkenazic tradition, people came from a shtetl in Europe. And while we wax nostalgic about the shtetl, the truth of the matter is many people were not terribly educated. They did what they did because that's what a Jew did. And mikveh is a deeply mystical idea. In other words, it's a trans-rational idea. It's not something logical. Okay, I could tell you that I believe that we are transformed under the waters of the mikvah, but I cannot tell you how it is or why it is. And I think that a healthy number of people actually suffered the misunderstanding that mikvah was for hygienic reasons. And I'll tell you something interesting. I'm guessing that a large number of you have heard of the celebrated artist Marc Chagall. Well, his wife Bella was also an artist. She's a writer. And in her book called Burning Lights, she has a chapter about mikvah where she records how she went with her mother. It's a memoir. So she recalls how she went with her mother every Friday to the mikvah. Now, Bella's mother didn't go to the mikvah every Friday. No woman goes to the mikvah every Friday. However, for so much of our history, Jews were not permitted to use the bathhouses that belonged to the general population, nor could they, in some geographic locations, even use the streams or rivers that the rest of the people could use. So we had to build our own bathhouses. And once we did that, it made sense to build a mikvah into the bathhouse. But that, unfortunately, only kind of soldered the idea of hygiene and mikvah together. It kind of strengthened the inextricable link between mikvah and hygiene, which is not the case. Going to the mikvah is all about immersion of the soul. But this was an idea a lot of people had. And then they came to the new country. And mikvahot at the turn of the century in North America were not in a very good position. If they existed, they were small. They were utilitarian. They were not properly taken care of. They didn't have the filtration systems we have today. They probably didn't use, the various chemicals that we use today. And the young women looked at this pool where the water might once have been clear, but now is kind of gray and murky. And they said to their parents, their mothers, their grandmothers, now that we're heir to the modern miracle of indoor plumbing, we should put our bodies into these dirty pools. Now add to this that they didn't understand why the mikvah was necessary. The mikvot were not welcoming. And then came the second wave of feminism. And now mikvah became the punching bag. If mikvah was, for some, misunderstood, now it became the symbol of all that was misogynist, patriarchal, and phallocentric in the Jewish tradition. Why should a woman, because she has a natural function, have to be cleansed of some type of impurity? And so it actually seemed that feminism was going to be the last nail in the coffin for the mikvah. But we are, as everybody already knows, people who are made of something different. Every time it looks like we're going to die, they're going to be finished with us, we return. And so it is with the mitzvah of mikvah. And thankfully now, all these years later, I would say that the turning point was probably in the 80s. I would say until the late 70s, it seemed like there wasn't going to be much mikvah usage in this country. But things have turned around. And now the mikvot are beautiful. And finally, they're beginning to reflect the real import of this into our lives. But what's a little bit still behind is talking about these institutions. We need to really talk about this more frequently. And I wonder, why are people afraid to talk about mikvah? And I think part of it is that it could intimacy, because after a woman visits the mikvah, she and her husband can now re-engage in their intimate relations. I understand. But I think part of it is that people are just a little bit afraid to talk about a system, a discipline, which calls for celibacy for 2 weeks out of each month. That's crazy, right? Celibacy for 2 weeks out of each month sounds outlandish. And I will tell you right now, it is not always easy. I always tell my students, when it becomes easy, run. Don't walk to a therapist. It's not supposed to be easy. But it is precisely, I believe, what we don't yet know or realize we actually crave. I believe that we have never needed the rhythm of mikvah more than we do today. Consider, we live in very interesting times. People used to get married, especially women, for safety, for social acceptance, for economic stability. The most romantic aspect of marriage was companionship. And of course, you had to get married to have children. But today, we get married for none of the above reasons. We're nearly at a time where a woman wants a baby, she could just choose the semen off of the internet, choose her donor, and inseminate herself in her bedroom. We're almost there. Social acceptance, you need to get married. Financial security, you need to get married. Ridiculous. There are other ways. There are neater, easier ways to achieve all of this for which people used to get married. For the first time, people are getting married because they are choosing that lifestyle. And why? Because it seems people believe that it grants them a sense not only of pleasure, but of connection. They desire and crave this very combination that we talk about, that we Jews have been talking about for millennia under the chuppah. Ahava v'achva, shalom v'reut, the binary. We want love and we want companionship. We want peace and we want friendship. We desire and crave this combination. In other words, in our relationships, we're looking for security, predictability, and permanence. Let's say we're looking to come home. And at the same time, we want our relationships to offer novelty, mystery, surprise, all the reasons that we travel. Let's call it journey. We want comfort and we want edge. We want predictability and we want to be surprised. We want to desire, which necessitates distance. We want erotica, which is built on the elusive, and we want comfortable friendship. It's like we want to have a brand new sexy stiletto in all the comfort of worn slippers. And I want to propose that there is a system in this world. It's a great gift given to us by God that feeds exactly this binary dynamic, and it's called mikvah. Now, what I don't want to do is for a nanosecond have you believe that I think that mikvah is a panacea to all social ills, that it's going to heal magically a fractured marriage. I'm not saying that. I don't think it's going to heal a fractured marriage.
Okay.
But I think it infuses marriage with a dimension that simply cannot be come by in any other way. We have the good doctor on with us. So who am I to talk about anything biological or chemical? But I live in Binghamton, New York, and a little bit further up in my parts in Ithaca, there was a professor for many years, Cindy Chazen, and she actually studied chemistry. But when she talked about the chemistry between people, she wasn't talking about like what we do. We talk about chemistry in the pedestrian sense, like you and I have chemistry. She actually studied the combination of dopamine, oxytocin, and phenylethylamine that flood the system at the beginning of a relationship. And she actually charted just how long that's true. And evolutionary biologists love this because that is sustained for just about the amount of time you need to court, that's an old-fashioned word for date, marry, and produce 2 children, basically kind of replace yourself, okay? And then at that point, it kind of just fizzles off. People start to believe that something went awry with their relationship because they're not feeling the thrill of what it used to feel like. But here's an interesting thing. When you engage in a system that has you pull apart at intervals, you kind of elongate this dynamic. And you have a situation where people are waiting to come back to each other 10, 20, and even 30 years after they've been married to the same person. Now, again, misunderstand me. It's not a magical cure. But I feel extremely comfortable saying it is a wondrous gift that, like I said, infuses marriage with a whole new dimension. I get nervous when I hear people talk about mikvah and they promise you that your sex life will be off the charts and your marriage will be sublime. Just like it gives me hives when people talk about a mikvah like it's some kind of beautiful spa, which thankfully most mikvahs today are. But a spa is where you go if it's your thing and you have disposable income and disposable time. A mikvah is where a Jewish woman goes, and sometimes she feels like going, and sometimes she doesn't. And here's the good news. For every woman that goes under the waters of the mikvah and hears celestial choirs, and meets the imahot, the matriarchs, and feels connected to her great-grandmother, and feels transformed and renewed and rejuvenated and is levitating, I promise you there are 9 who come out feeling cold and wet. And that's okay. Somewhere, somehow, we have begun to collate the words godliness and spirituality. They're not the same thing. Spirituality means an experience that transcends our physical senses, something beyond what we can see, hear, smell, touch. It can be really spiritual to watch the sun set, to listen to a beautiful concerto, or even to take a hit on a powerful drug. Those are all spiritual experiences. Godliness is when finite human being gets to actually contribute to the scheme of the infinite and become one with God through doing a mitzvah. It's actually that simple. Every time we do a mitzvah, we say, Asher kiddishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. As you no doubt know, Kiddushin is the Hebrew term for marriage. Every time we engage in a mitzvah, Asher Kiddishanu, getting married, we are engaged in the spousal relationship. We are making love with Hashem. But sometimes it's going to be something that's a little bit more difficult, and it's not going to be that romantic, and it's not going to be that exciting. That doesn't mean it's not important. It doesn't mean that it's not uber important to do this. And so that's why this idea that you should go to the mikvah because it's going to make you feel so spiritual, you're going to feel so blah, 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 blah. Forget about it. Sometimes it will, and sometimes it won't. So forget about mikvah as a spa. Yeah, the mikvah should look like a spa, but you're not going because it is a spa. And forget about this idea that you're going to the mikvah to feel spiritual. What kind of insult is this to this mitzvah? Which other mitzvah do we do to feel spiritual? And by the way, which other mitzvah do we treat like this boutique item where we gather women in a living room and we whisper about something? This is a serious mitzvah, and God should bless us that whenever we do a mitzvah, we should feel the grandeur and the majesty and the deep sense of privilege. But sometimes, because of our frailties and our foibles, we just think about ourselves, and sometimes it's hard, and sometimes we don't feel so calibrated and we don't feel so aligned. That's okay. Whatever you feel or don't feel when you go to the mikvah, you should know that you have been transformed, that you have connected to your creator in the most important way possible. I want to really take your questions now, so I want to conclude my formal presentation with a Talmudic story which you may not have heard of in your Hebrew school. One night, Rabbi Kahana found himself under the bed of his great teacher, Rav. I'm not 100% sure what he was doing there, but it seems that he wanted to learn the Torah way concerning intimacy. He listened as Rav and Mrs. Rav enjoyed an intimate interlude, and at a certain point, perhaps forgetting himself, he exclaimed out loud concerning what seemed to him his teacher's great, maybe inordinate ardor, his excitement. At this point, Mrs. Rav said, "Do you hear human sounds?" And Rav said, "I'll take care of this, honey. And where do you look when you're looking for something? Under the bed." So Rav looked under the bed where he found his student. And at this point, Rav chastised him and he told him that what he was doing was inappropriate. To which Rav Kahana exclaimed, "It is a matter of Torah and I require to learn it." There was no reply on the part of Rav, nor the authoritative Talmudic narrator. And that, I believe, is instructive. So because I believe that no one should have to climb under the bed of their rabbi or their rebbitzin, I am inviting all questions about the subject at this time. There is so much they have not touched on yet, but I'm happy for it to come out during the questions. And I know that Dr. Libman is equally happy to entertain your questions as well. So I don't see any questions in the chat box, but maybe Rebbitzin Raskin has some questions that have come into her by text.
Firstly, thank you so much, my darling sister. Thank you, Dr. Libman, for giving us so much time. And we do have, I'm inviting all of you to either put it in the chat box or send it to me by WhatsApp. But I do have a question here, and that is for the doctor. And the question is it safe to go to the mikvah with recent surgical scars? They may not be entirely closed and with a compromised immune system. There is chlorine in the water, but is it really killing all viruses and bacteria in the water, since the water is not hot enough to kill germs or secretions in the water? Usually pool water is cold in order to kill germs transmissions, and hot tubs are considered germ transmitters. Can you please answer this, Dr. Libman?
Okay. So first of all, that is a bit of a tricky question, because this answer would be a case by case, depending upon how healed the lesion was. The more open the lesion is, the more susceptible it is to having germs go inside. So I would be reluctant to have someone toivel if the lesion looked gummy and open. I think it's just too susceptible. I think if it was dry and crusted over, that is already like the crust is already protective. So, but this would really be case by case on how it looks. I would not want to expose somebody to any kind of germs.
Thank you. If there's any other questions, please feel free at this time to put them in the chat box or to send it to me on 438-764-5087. So we need the questions coming in. So far, I don't have any questions on my text or WhatsApp.
There's a question in the checks. How do you go to the mikvah if you can't swim? So if you're going to an indoor mikvah, what I call a domesticated mikvah, which looks very much like a tiny pool, but it's anything but. And there are always steps that go down into the mikvah. So one does not have to be able to swim to use a domesticated type of mikvah. If you're going into the ocean or a large lake, then that's a completely different story. And I would say that if you cannot swim, then you have to be accompanied by somebody who will be right next to you. And you'll go out as far as you have to go so that the water is deep enough so that you can completely immerse underneath the water and have this person who knows how to swim be right next to you.
Okay, we have a question that just came in. Based on what Mrs. Slonim has said, that a woman goes to the mikvah, whether she's in the mood or not in the mood, if that's what she understood. She comes, most of the time, the woman says, I am in the mood. I do come home and I find my husband in a different mood. Can you give us some tips on that concept where husband and wife are on two different settings?
Well, like Dr. Libman said, when she was questioned earlier about the scars after surgery, I would venture to say that this is a much more complex dynamic, and certainly is not a one size fits all, but I'll try to throw out a few thoughts. First, I would love to speak to the husband. I know this question is from the wife, because I think it's important for Jewish couples to know that in Jewish law, sexual intimacy, sexual gratification and pleasure is a woman's privilege and a man's obligation. And there are a number of times where a man actually has an obligation of biblical proportion to pleasure his wife. And one of those times is when she comes home from the mikvah. Now, of course, in the duration of what we hope is a long relationship together, obviously there's going to be various degrees of desire by each one of the couple, and that could have something to do with a lot of different factors. But all things being equal, that is considered a special night, and if not in the mood, then he should do whatever it takes to get in the mood, is what I have to say about that. Having said that, as I alluded to earlier, this is very, very complex, and I don't know what she might be doing to create a situation where he's not in the mood. In other words, I'm not saying she's doing anything, but one of the things I think it's really important for all of us to remember is that the quality of their intimate life in the bedroom is going to be impacted by what happens in every other room in the house. So the question is, what is going on with the rest of their relationship? And if it's healthy and all is as it should be, then have to ask other questions. Is there something about the mikvah night that puts him off? Or is there a disparity in desire just across the board for them? And is he on medication that contributes to this? Are there physiological reasons? Are there psychological reasons? And so on and so forth. It's very, very complex. But generally speaking, maybe he just needs to hear from a mentor who's a man, what his obligation and what his responsibility is here, especially on mikvah night.
Okay, thank you. I have another question here. My mother always took us to the mikvah for either lack of having a babysitter or perhaps for giving us, exposing us to that notion. As I grew up, I was always taught that mikvah is very hush night. We don't talk about it. We don't tell friends. We don't share it with our children, and we try to get a babysitter and we make up a story where we're going. Now you are proposing that we take it from under the hat and we expose it. Would you tell us to sit down with our children and talk to them about it, let them know when we're going? What is the middle road between keeping the modesty in the bedroom and exposing our children to something that we want to give over to the next generation?
Well, I mean, it's exactly as the questioner put it. It's two different things. I think you definitely want to tell your children about it in the right time and at the right age and the right stage. But if it's not something that's spoken on, children could live, their entire childhood in their parents' home, and perhaps not even know that their mother is doing this on a monthly basis. And we can't always expect that children will go on to do this themselves simply because they're taught at a certain magic age in their life. And that's what I said earlier, that in the Sephardic tradition, it did not fall away because organically it was passed down from generation to generation, and it was not something that was kept hush hush. So I do believe that children should be told at the right time, at the right age, and that's different for every child. And I think both girls and boys should be told about this. That does not equal knowing exactly which night their mother goes. I think there is such a thing as too much information, because we have to be prudish about it, but because it's uncomfortable for the child. I think we have to honor that. And I want to explain that for a moment. I think that as people grow old and they learn about the birds and the bees, you still never think about your parents doing that. And there's a reason for that. It's not because, again, because of prudishness, and not because we believe in immaculate conception, but there's a child within, there's a pure place within us that knows a truth that's higher than reproductive physiology. And that is that we do come from a place that transcends, can be described. And perhaps for this reason, we don't think about how we came to be. How did we come to be? We came, hopefully, with Hashem's help, because our parents love each other and are devoted to each other and empathize and sympathize. That's where we came from. So I think there's a very big difference between telling your child, I'm going to the mikveh tonight, and speaking with your child and telling them, I go to the mikveh every month. And go as far as saying that if it should happen that a child finds out that you went to the mikveh, you know what? Say yes. It's a private thing, but yes, that's where I was. I'll tell you a funny story. When I was taking Kala classes, that is when I was first introduced to these laws, I remember that my instructor told a story about how one night she had to go to the mikveh, and she told her children that she was going to a meeting, a Hadassah meeting. Hadassah used to be a very powerful women's organization in North America. And so she left the house and the phone rang and one of her children answered, and the word, where is your mommy? Which, by the way, maybe you shouldn't do. You should just say, can I speak to mother? And if the child says she's out, don't say, where's mommy? But this woman said, where's mommy? And the child said she went to a Hadassah meeting. It so happened that the caller was the president of the Hadassah chapter in their neighborhood, but she hadn't heard about this meeting, and immediately she believed that there was some type of insurrection and she was going to be booted out, and it started a whole conflagration. And I remember she taught us, whatever story you tell your children, do not tell them a story that's going to create a fight or a problem. Think about what excuse you're using. So that's, neither here nor there. Yes, I think that there are two values here. There's the value of teaching this to the next generation in an organic way, in a way that makes sure that they know how important this is and absolutely central. And at the same time, retaining the modesty of what's going on in the bedroom, not only because parents deserve their privacy, but maybe even just as profoundly, because the child deserves that removed.
I see that there's a question in the chat box.
I don't see that.
No, it was a question that popped up before.
Oh, okay.
You see it?
Nope. I see the question,
Okay.
how do you go to the mikvah if you can't swim? But we talked about that.
Okay. So here is the next question. I had the chance to visit a very Orthodox home. To the shock I should have not gone in. I was actually looking to buy a house, and it was a house of an Orthodox home. I went into the master bedroom, and I noticed that there were two large beds in the bedroom. The owner of the house was not there, so I couldn't get any explanation, but I thought maybe you can talk about that if you want to.
I'm not adverse to talking about anything. So it's biblically forbidden for a Jewish woman and her husband to engage in sexual relations during the time of her period, until after which time she immerses in the mikvah. During the time that she is in nidah, that is the biblical term for from when she gets her period until after she immerses in the mikvah, they should also abstain from hugging, kissing, caressing, petting. This too, according to most opinions, is biblically prohibited. And then in addition, there are a host of actions that are prohibited simply because we are creatures of habit. And one thing can lead to another. And there is a default understanding that because these two people are married, there's a sexual tension, there's desire, and therefore they have to be careful. It's kind of like, imagine if you had an allergy and you knew that if you ate peanuts, you'd go into anaphylactic shock. So if you find yourself at a wedding or some other event, you wouldn't just desist from eating the foods that very obviously have peanuts. You would go find the caterer and ask them what else might have peanut particles or made with peanut oil or what have you, because the risk is too great. You just don't want to die at this wedding. And it's the same thing. The risk of transgressing, of trespassing, of actually having intercourse when a woman is a nidah is so great spiritually that the rabbis put into effect, like I said, kind of this buffer zone. Okay? So it's kind of like putting a fence around a manhole so we don't fall in. And I would say that the most important of all of these is the institution of two beds in the bedroom. But let me give you ideas of some of the other things. Not to eat from the same plate, not to drink from the same cup, not to sit very close to each other where they can feel each other, and things like that. So clearly, the one area where we have to assume there's the greatest chance for them to trespass is in the bed. And for this reason, for the time that a woman is a nidah, she and her husband would sleep in separate beds. When she is no longer a nidah, that is not necessary. I hope that helps
Thank you.
explain. I think
that helps, but
I
the
think
questions that are coming up, which is in connection, which maybe we can touch upon, really you have answered, but maybe a bit more, because 3 questions just came up privately. I'm okay to go to the mikvah. I understand the importance of going to mikvah. I am just a very needy person, and I need to be hugged, I need to be caressed, I need to be kissed, and that part is too hard. And so one person is saying, I actually stopped going to mikvah because I figured if I can't do it all, I might as well just enjoy my life. And so that was really the question is, what do I do? I want us to keep on hugging. I still want to kiss my husband. I know that I was taught I'm not really allowed to, but that is very, very hard for me. And do I have a choice? Can I do one without the other is one question. And the other question is, it's just hard. I try it for 2, 3, 4 days. Most of the time during my period when I'm anyways not feeling well and I want to be left alone. But after that's gone, I just want to hold hands, hug, and I feel I can control myself.
All right. Well, the first thing I want to say is congratulations to you. It sounds like you are in a strong marriage and you have healthy libido and you have healthy need to be touched. So that's all good news. In terms of how you should proceed. So there's 2 things I want to say here. One is, I think that one of the most difficult things to experience is lack of affection when you feel it should be coming away, you deserve, and there's no good reason for you not to get it. But if and when you know that the lack of affection is an expression of devotion to something higher, it's not personal, it has nothing to do with your husband's lack of love or devotion or sensitivity. He, like you, are both devoting yourself to something higher. The lack of hugging and kissing and caressing doesn't have a sting. The sting comes from feeling like he should be doing this for me, but he's trying to punish me. So I think that's one thing to think about. And the other I want to address very firmly, I want to say to whoever had this question, that this is not an all or nothing paradigm. So if a couple desists, if they abstain from having intercourse from when she begins her period until after which time she visits the mikvah, they are doing an invaluable thing for their soul, for their marriage, for their family, for their children, for the Jewish people. And it is a great mitzvah, a huge mitzvah, and she can still proceed to the mikvah, even if they hug and they kiss and they caress. Certainly, it's better if they don't. But if they do hug, kiss, and caress, that does not obviate the possibility of her going to the mikvah, her keeping a very great mitzvah. And I think that's really, really important. Now, let's say a couple is not hugging and caressing and petting, but they simply can't see themselves sleeping in two different beds. Again, I say the same thing. It's not all or nothing. If you can't see yourself sleeping in two different beds, but if you have great discipline, if you exercise self-control, you sleep not in each other's embrace, then again, you could still go to the mikvah. And I think this is really, really important for people to know that it's not an all or nothing paradigm here.
Thank you. That was very important. I have here a very fundamental question, which is really back to basics. It's why is menstruating considered impure and unclean? So I don't think that impure and unclean is really the right thing, because impure has nothing to do with unclean. Am I correct? I mean, that's my added thing, but I would give it over to you.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct that impure is not a synonym for unclean. Although unfortunately, the word impure is so laden with innuendo. And when people hear impurity, it sounds like they're hearing vile, filth, unclean, bad, negative. It just has a lot of baggage. So you said we're going back to basics. Let's actually go back to basics. And let's look at the biblical word, which is tameh or tuma, and which we're taught is connected to the idea of timtum, which means obstruction or impediment. And to put this as simply as I can, if you look into the third book of the Torah, if you look into Leviticus, Vayikra, you see that there's a discussion about many different types of ritual impurity. And I kind of hinted to this earlier because in temple times, if you go on a good archaeological tour of the old city of Jerusalem, then they will tell you that there are literally ruins of ancient mikvot everywhere. If you stopped a young child in Jerusalem in temple times and asked them, where's the closest mikvah, they could probably point in 8 different directions. And that is because all tameh, all tuma, forgive me, in Jewish tradition comes from death, from the eclipse of life or the truncation of life. And that can happen in many different expressions, in many different iterations. But all of them cause a person to fall into a state of tumah. Now, let's understand this a little bit more. We know that the Hebrew word for world is olam. The Libman of the Hebrew word olam is he'elem, which means to obscure or to shroud. The world obscures its creator. The world perfectly shrouds, masks its creator. It's a game of peekaboo. God hides, and our job is to seek. And the most manifest illustration or reminder that there is a creator is life. And that is why life is a harbinger of holiness, which is why the absence of life is the harbinger of tumah, of impurity. It's the cessation of godly flow to some degree, okay? So when a woman menstruates, when her body gets the signal that she is not going to fertilize an egg that month, it's not going to happen. She menstruates, she sheds the uterine lining. So it's it's the absence or the goodbye to the possibility or the potential for life for that month. And for the reason, it puts her into a state of nida, a particular type of impurity. And just to put this in context, when a man ejaculated, he too would be in a state of ritual impurity. Okay, that too is the passing of potential life from his body.
Thank you.
It has nothing to do with being unclean. It has to do with a spiritual reality. And another thing I think that perhaps this virus is forcing us to recognize, and that is that there's so much that is true and important and potent and powerful that the naked eye does not see. And that's kind of going back to basics in the Jewish tradition. Everything in the physical world is simply a pale reflection of a spiritual reality. So there are certain things we see, and it's easier for us to, wrap our brains around it. We don't see ritual purity or impurity, but it's just as real as dark and light, as positive and negative electrical forces, and any other dynamics that you're more familiar with.
Thank you. A woman is asking if you can touch upon a bit about after birth. Why is it that if we're bringing life into this world and we're wishing each other mazal tov because it just had a baby, why does it have to come with the concept of a nida at such a crucial moment when I need my husband in so many various different ways, and then here I am, a nida for 4 or 5 weeks? If it's about bringing life into this world, then why is it associated with nida?
Okay, so that's a very good question, and it's an oft asked question. Again, when the semen leaves the body of a man, it's the leaf taking of potential life that puts him into a state of impurity. When a woman carries a child within her, who's pregnant, there's a tremendous kedusha, there's a tremendous holiness that she is carrying with her. It's almost like she's an ark for a Torah scroll. And when she gives birth, in the wake of parturition, there is the absence of that holiness. And just like nature abhors a vacuum in the physical sense, the same is true in the spiritual sense, in the metaphysical sense. So where there was holiness, there's now a type of impurity that fills that space and dissipates after some time, after which she goes to the mikvah. Now, interestingly enough, in biblical times, if you look at the parsha in Vayikra, Tazria, you find that after giving to a boy, there was a certain amount of time a woman waited before she went to the temple to bring sacrifices, before she was able to go to the mikvah. And actually, after she gave birth to a girl, she had to wait double the amount of time. And at first blush, this seems to be exhibit A for just how patriarchal and misogynistic tradition is. But actually, it's again speaking to this idea. And it underscores the physiological truism that a little girl who is 1 minute old has already within her all of the potential life that will come through her. So unlike sperm that is constantly regenerated, we only get one crack at eggs, and that we're born. So while a little boy is a source of great kedusha, the little girl is a much more potent level of holiness, because it's one life and all the potential life that passed through her. And therefore, in the wake of birthing, there is more potent, stronger, more intense type of impurity, of tumah, which necessitates a longer period of time before she can go to the mikvah. In this, what I said before, this post pre-temple era, really all of this has been pushed to the side for now, and a woman will go to the mikvah after she gives birth, as soon as she is able to determine that she has stopped her postpartum bleeding, however long that might take, and then she makes her hefsek. She does that internal examination with which she ascertains that her bleeding has ceased, and a week later she can go to the mikvah. Now, that explains why. It doesn't speak to how hard it is. I'd like to speak to that for a moment. Again and again, I want to underscore that I believe the hardest part of a woman not receiving the amount of intimate overtures and the quality of intimate interludes. The greatest pain is when she feels her husband is holding back, her husband has lost interest, her husband is just callous. But again, when it's part of a system to which both are dedicated and devoted, and there's a transcendent reason, there isn't that pain, even if there is that yearning. And now here I want to just speak very personally. I'm not actually, revealing anything I haven't already revealed in the preface to my book, Total Immersion, where I speak about the fact that I was born into an observant home. I was born into a Hasidic home. It really wasn't so much a question of if I was going to keep this mitzvah like all of the others. But I didn't really come to appreciate the profundity of the mitzvah until I had my first child. So I just love to read. And while I was pregnant, I read everything I get my hands on about pregnancy and postpartum. And everything I read didn't seem to end very well. Every book had a chapter on how your sex life was probably going to take a hit and your husband was going to be jealous, and if you're going to be breastfeeding, now the breasts that belong to him, he has to share with the baby, and all this stuff about, you have to be prepared about how it was going to be so different and it wasn't going to be the same, and so on and so forth. And I remember thinking in my head, I believe in life after death, but I don't know if I believe in life after birth. But it wasn't really making me very excited. And after I had my first child, it took me a very, very long time to stop bleeding for whatever reason. It's just what happened. And by the time I was able to go to the mikvah, I remember it being just an extraordinary experience. And if anything, my intimate life became outrageously more wonderful afterwards about the discrepancy between what I had read and what I had experienced. And in subsequent years, when in speaking with so many people about this, my thesis, I think, it has a lot of weight, and that is that a lot of women end up having intimacy, they end up having sex a lot earlier than they're actually ready to do so. Because everybody says they just want to snuggle, they just want to caress, they just want to spoon, they just want to hold each other. But at a certain point, it seems a woman starts to feel guilty that, her husband has been so patient, he's been so nice, he's been so good, she should do more for him. But very often she's not really ready. And he, if he's not that intelligent, may even say something, but sometimes he doesn't say something, but you kind of feel like he's disappointed or it wasn't as good as he was hoping for. And then she says, what? I went out on a limb. It was painful. I wasn't ready for this, but I did this for you. And now you're turning around and you're calling me a frigid, whatever. And it just begins to spiral downward. And so I think that this is one of these situations where the mitzvah itself, and I really believe that this mitzvah more than any other gives us physical, psychological, emotional benefits. It's not the reason to do a mitzvah, but I believe that the mitzvah of Taharat HaMishpacha is that one mitzvah where you actually see, there are a lot of mitzvahs we could talk about. We could talk about Shabbat, and there are many benefits of that as well, and so on and so forth, but I think this one is where it's most glaring. So to the woman who says it's really hard after childbirth, I feel your pain, sister. I've been there, I've done that. It is not easy. But I think, again, the most important thing is to remember why you're doing this. And I think that I feel that really takes the edge off of things. And I think it's also important to remember that there are so many ways in which we can express love and devotion and dedication and intimacy. I'll never forget, I don't remember which one of my babies, but after one of my children was born, after the nurses were cleaning me up, and we were all married women, I assume. So basically, they diaper you after you had a baby. And as they're doing this, one of the nurses says to me, "Do you mind if I ask you a question?" And I said, "No." And she says, "I noticed that you kissed the doctor, and I'm very close with my doctor. She's a good friend, and you kissed your doula, but I didn't see you kissing your husband." And I was about to launch into a full throttle explanation. And then the other nurse said to her, "But didn't you see the way they looked at each other when he came in after the birth?" She saw that. So I think it's really important for us to recognize and cherish the ways in which we can embrace each other and hug each other and support each other and be there for each other, all without touching skins. And when we do that, we can actually appreciate the times that we can be physical so much more. So I hope that's helpful. I see a question about, is there an age when older women can go to a mikvah? I'm assuming that the questioner is understanding that at a certain point after a woman goes into menopause, and menopause is a tricky thing, but after she's actually in menopause and the fat lady sings, she has to go to the mikvah one last time. And after that, there are women who have a custom to go on Erev Yom Kippur. But after that, she wouldn't go on a regular basis. And that's customary rather than biblically ordained. There would be no bracha, no blessing that goes with that immersion, etc.
Thank you. From what you're saying, if I only discovered mikvah after menopause, do I have a chance? And are you saying that, what this woman is saying is that she never knew about the mitzvah. She only found out about it later on in life, way after menopause, never been there, never done that because I just felt I'm too old. But now that you've mentioned that, would you say that it's not too late for me?
Well, I don't know who I'm speaking to, but let's say I'm talking to Joyce. So Joyce, first I would say congratulations, mazel tov, that you came upon this knowledge now. This is a real gift from God. And as long as a woman is married to a Jewish man, she can go to the mikvah and, until her last day. And this is no trifle matter, because we're taught that when a woman goes and she goes with sincerity and she goes with devotion and wants to connect herself to God and wants to do teshuvah, she wants to return to God, that going even this one time can retroactively affect in very profound manner not only the soul of her husband, but the souls of her children, her grandchildren, and even her great-grandchildren. So by all means, if you are married to a Jewish man, you should call a rebbitzin immediately and find out the details of preparing to go to the mikvah, and mazel tov to you. I'm really, really excited for you.
So my dear sister Rivkah and Dr. Esther Libman, I thank you so much. I think this has been extremely interesting and eye-opener for so many. And I wish that all of those that participated, I'm hoping that all of those that participated learned a lot and will go back to the mikvah with excitement, with a newfound knowledge and education. And again, I cannot thank you both, Dr. Esther Libman, for taking of your time to explain to us how safe it is in light of COVID-19, and that we have nothing to worry about, and we should go, and provided that we are healthy, and the mikvah is extremely clean and has all the new rules instituted, and et cetera, et cetera. And thank you, Rivkah, for being such a source of knowledge and giving it over so clearly, so precisely, without mincing any words, and allowing us to have a better understanding of a mitzvah that we own, that is our right, that is our gift, and is so important to our marital life, and a mitzvah that also enhances our marital life. So thank you all. Thank you for joining us. A wonderful night to everybody.
Have a good evening, everybody. So nice to see you. Thank you, Dr. Libman.
Thank you very much, Sarah. It was
Thank
an
you,
honor
Doctor.
to hear you and the Rebbitzin, Slonim. It was just beautiful. Very, very special. Very special. Whoops, I'm covering my camera. It's just beautiful. Thank you very much for allowing me to play a very small role. Thank you.
You played
All
an
right.
important role, and I thank you for jumping on the bandwagon despite your busy schedule.
Okay. Take care. Be well.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. All the best.
Bye-bye. Okay.